This handout is just a little bit of a timeline. I'll explain every prayer. Not something we're going to spend a great deal of time on, but question came up in the last class period, and so thought I'd do a little bit of research on it. I like doing timelines when we can figure things out, and maybe this is one of those times. We'll see. John, would you word us in the prayer?
Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to come here to study thy word, together to edify one another and to show each of one up strength that we might be stronger Christians in the future. We're thankful, Father, that you have blessed us with many daily blessings that we enjoy. Thankful, Father, for that, and we're especially thankful.
Yeah. While I'm thinking about it, John Fry, when I announce this later, John Fry had to stay in tonight, get caught up on some rest, and Christina said she was still with her mother at the hospital, so Fry will be with us. So, if you look at for a moment at Genesis chapter 26, verse 34 and 35, the last two verses of Genesis 26, it tells us that Esau was how old when he married Judith? "40 years old. He's 40 years old. How old would Jacob be? Okay. Jacob be 40 years old. So Esau's 40 years old, and he marries, it says, the daughter of a Hittite. Also, I understand that these are the same things as the daughters of Heth. Heth was ancestor of Hittites were descendants of Heth. Later on, Sarah talks about the daughters of Heth, or Rebecca talks about the daughters of Heth giving her grief. I think we're talking about the same women here. But anyway, if you read, Esau was 40 years old, and then you get into chapter 27, and it says, "Now it came about when Isaac was old, his eyes were too dim to see." We might assume that whenever 27 takes off, that we're still, because 27 takes off, and ultimately, whenever Jacob is given the blessing of the birthright, then he's sent away. And so we might conclude that Jacob and Esau will still be around 40 years old, but we don't know for sure how much time has elapsed between what we read in the last part of chapter 26 and then when it says when Isaac was old in chapter 27, well, how old was he? And I think Regina brought up a thought that possibly whenever Jacob goes to Canaan, when Jacob goes to Haran, that he's around 40 years old. And Dallas had made a comment that he had read somewhere around 70, 77 or so. I'd read that as well, but I didn't remember where it came from. Anyway, so that's where we're finding out where that comes from on this timeline. And so we're kind of putting some facts together under this first section. Joseph is 30 years old when he stands before Pharaoh. Jacob moves to Egypt during there's been 7 years of plenty and 2 years of famine whenever Jacob moves to Egypt. So there's been 9 years since Joseph stood before Pharaoh. When Jacob moves to Egypt, there's been 9 years have taken place. So that makes Joseph 9 years old. When Jacob moves to Egypt, Joseph is 39 years old. And number 3, Jacob is 130 when he moves to Egypt. So that means Jacob, this is the therefore in question number 4, Jacob was about 91 years old whenever Joseph is born. So there's one number that we have. Jacob was about 91 years old whenever Joseph was born. And pointed out Jacob dies at 147. So whenever Jacob has Joseph, he's older. If we take a man being 78, he lives to be 78 today, then That'd be like a man having a child at 48. So he's older. Usually you think about having children in the 20s, maybe 30s. But anyway, so Jacob is older when he has Joseph, but he's about 91 years old. And then, before having Joseph, Jacob works for Laban for 14 years. When you read these passages here, it seems to imply that Joseph is born at the end of the second 7-year period. He served 7 years for Rachel, but Jacob deceived him, so now he has to serve another 7 years, and he gets both Leah and Rachel, but there's 14 years there, and that's when Joseph is born. And so Jacob was, if that be the case, then Jacob was about 77 when he came to Haran, because he was 91 years old when Joseph was born, and he came to Haran 14 years prior to that. So that's where the 77 comes from. And if that be true, that he's 77 when he comes to Haran, then how old would he be when he marries Leah and Rachel? 7 years later, right? 84. So that's where these numbers come from. And just a little bit more information. We think about Isaac just for a second. He was 60 years old whenever he had Jacob and Esau. And if Isaac was 60 years old when he had Jacob and Esau, how old would Isaac be whenever Esau married at age 40? He would be 100. That's what the part. Isaac was 100 years old whenever Esau married Hittite, descendants of Heth. And we point out Esau was 40 years old, Jacob, same age. And then Isaac dies at age 180, and this is after Jacob has worked, because Jacob leaves and goes and works for Laban for how many years altogether? 14 for the women, then how many? Then after that, how many more? 6, so 20 years. And he points out, I've worked to Laban, I've worked for you these 20 years. And so he actually worked for Laban for 20 years before he returns. And if Isaac dies at age 180, then you take 20 years from that, and that'd be 160. And what this is pointing out is that when Jacob moved to Haran, it would have been at some point between the time whenever Esau was 40 and Isaac was 100, and when Isaac was 160. So some point during that time, Isaac's 100, now he's 160. Well, Jacob left and went to Haran. And if the first section be true, then it would have been, Isaac would have been 137 if Jacob leaves for Haran at age 77. But, and so that's kind of what this last section gets to. How much time, we're asking the question, now we go back to Genesis, the last part of Genesis 26, the first part of Genesis 27, how much time has elapsed? If we didn't have any other passages, we might again think that's the same time period. But how much time has elapsed? Well, I think this helps us to understand some of that. Chapter 27, verse 1 is before Jacob leaves for Haran. We've asked him the question, how much time has elapsed since Esau married Judith? One thing we learn from Genesis 27, verse 46, Jacob or Esau has married these women. There's enough time for Rebekah to have become frustrated with these wives of Esau. Did I say that right? Esau married, and there's enough time for Rebekah to become frustrated with his wives. And if Jacob is 77 whenever he goes to Haran, then Isaac would be 137 years old, because he would have been 100 whenever Esau was 40. Isaac would have been 100, and so so whenever Jacob is 77, Isaac would be 137 years old. 37 years have passed since Esau married Judith at age 40, and so that would make Isaac 137. Jacob works for Laban 20 years. He returns to the land of Canaan at age 97, and Isaac would have been 157 when he returns, and he dies at 180, so Jacob's around him for 23 years. Anyway, that's kind of what all that's about, but the main thing I wanted to just show why some come to the conclusion that he was 77 years old when he came to Haran. And so that's something you take home with you and look at more. In fact, if you do some research and come up with some different things, let me know that. Anyway, thoughts or comments on any of that? Huh.
Ishmael had 12 sons. We don't know about daughters, but they went to Havilah, so they were all far away.
Mm-hmm.
And then Lot's were the Moabites, and they were their enemies. So there just might not have been a whole lot of choices like around.
Yeah.
Had to have gone somewhere, and that's who she knew.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we see God's direction in all of this as well, God's plan in all of this. And we don't know how old Leah and Rachel were. I mean, what relationship were they to Jacob? They were cousins, but depending on circumstances, there could have still been a huge age difference between the two of them. But anyway, this is kind of why some would say that Jacob was about 77 when he went here. Okay. So we're going to leave off, or start where we left off last class period, going to Genesis 29, and right now we're primarily looking at verses 18 through 20. And so this is where Laban has asked what the wage is going to be, and Jacob suggests, here's what I want. What does Jacob want? Rachel. And Jacob says, I'll work how many years? 7 years for Rachel. And so that's the agreement that they made. And we get down to verse 20, and it says, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days before because of his love for her. I was curious about this right here. Did Rachel have any say-so concerning this? Could she have said no? And, you know, what are these passages here? Okay, Rebecca. What's the story with Rebecca? Abraham sent his servant. We have to read those passages. Rebecca had a choice. In fact, Rebecca's father said, "Let's check with her and see what her wishes are." I mean, they and her brother, they wanted to check with her. So she had a choice, and let's talk about that first of all. If Rachel has a choice, how do you think she's feeling about this arrangement? Is there any indication that she was asked about it? I mean, you know, again, it could have been, but it's not in the text, right? But if you're Rachel, how do you think you would be feeling about this? Does it depend on what you think about Jacob?
It seems that you don't have a lot of information about the early years, but it seems like there's no animosity going on too much.
Yeah. She could have been excited about being a wife of Jacob, right? That's a possibility. He could have had, as we're talking about this thought of women of vice and virtue, part of the virtue could have been that she has this sense of duty toward what her father, toward the agreement her father had made, whether he asked her or not. That could be part of what she's feeling. Now, here's an interesting thing. Let's go to Genesis 31. How does she feel about this later? And this is whenever Jacob has decided, and of course God has told him, you need to go back to the land of Canaan. And so Jacob approaches his wives, Leah and Rachel, and prepares them for leaving. You know, we've got to go. Here's what, I've had this dream, God has told me, so we need to go. And so when you look at chapter 31, notice verse 14. Let's go ahead and read verse 14 through 16. It says, Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? For he has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. Of course, Jacob has explained to them how Laban was deceitful and didn't treat him right, and how that God kept prospering Jacob even in the midst of all of that. But anyway, what's Rachel and Leah's attitude about Laban right now and about what he did? In fact, they're saying that father treated them like what? A foreigner. Something else, what did you say? A stranger. That's true, but I was thinking of this thought of selling property, selling a slave. Are we not reckoning him as foreigners, for he has sold us and also entirely consumed our purchase price? And it's interesting, when you think of a marriage dowry, do you think of something that a groom pays the parents for the bride, or do you think it's something that parents give to the groom for the security of their daughter? I see some head shaking on the other one. It's interesting that I do think generally we're thinking of, and this is true in a lot of societies, perhaps even today, that when it comes to marriage dowry, the parents pay the groom, and it's like they're giving some purchase price, so they're giving some security for their daughter's benefit. The daughter's going to go live with the groom, and so they're giving some, if you just say money or whatever the value is, they're giving this to the groom so that he'll be able to take care of their daughter. But it's interesting, look at these passages here. Somebody read Genesis 34, 11 and 12. Somebody be turning to Exodus 22, 16 and 17, and then also 1 Samuel 18, 25. Genesis 34, 11 and 12. Who likes that one? Okay, Mark. Just hang on one. We'll get them all in a row here in just a second. Okay, Exodus 22, 16 and 17. 1 Samuel 18, 25. Kathy, you got that one? I beat you, Jack. I see eye contact there. Okay, so let's just consider what these are saying. Genesis 34, 11 and 12. Shechem wants who? Dinah. And who's paying who? Yeah, it's the bottom one. Shechem's paying the parents, okay? Exodus 22, verse 16 and 17.
He sleeps with her, he must quickly pay the bridal price for her to be his wife. If her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must pay him out in silver equal to the bridal price of the virgin.
Who's paying who? If we're talking about if a man's going to take a wife, is the groom paying the parents or the parents paying the groom? Okay, and then we have 1 Samuel 18:25.
Saul said, thus.
Oh. Go ahead, Jack. We'll get Kathy next time. Go ahead.
Thus shall ye say to David, King desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines, to be avenged of the king's enemies. Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines.
Yeah, Saul wanted to get rid of David, and he first of all tried to give David his oldest daughter, Merab, and David, it's not a trivial thing to become a son-in-law of the king, and so he didn't feel like that's something he needed to do. So Mary was given something to someone else, and then Saul had this plan on David likes Milcah. Is that the name? What? Micah. Okay, thank you. And so Saul's thinking, well, I'll give her to him, and the dowry that I'm going to request. Who's getting what? Is Saul getting something, or is David getting? Is Saul doing something for David, or is David getting something for Saul? Yeah. These foreskins, and Saul thinks that that's going to be the end of David. But anyway, these passages indicate that. So now we get back to chapter 31. What are we reading here that we just read? What was that? 14 through 16. Surely all the wealth which God has taken away from our father belongs to us and our children. Now then, do whatever God has said to you. Which one is this one? Are we not, verse 14, Rachel and Leah said to him, do we still have any portion or inheritance in our father's house? Are we not reckoned by him as foreigners? He has sold us and has also entirely consumed our purchase price. He's entirely consumed our purchase price. Yeah. Laban was given this money, I'll just put it that way, to Jacob for the security of his daughters. But that hasn't happened, has it? And because what? Because Laban's this kind of scoundrel, right? Anyway, that's part of it. But anyway, I think that helps us understand this. But it's interesting because I've always thought of it being the first, and there's a lot of there were some societies that date way back that's exactly what happened, that it was the groom giving to the parents. But I think we see when it comes to the Jews or the Hebrews, it seems to be the latter. So I guess we said all that because we're trying to think about how Leah and Rachel were feeling perhaps whenever this contract was first made. And when we read Genesis 31, there's some things that have happened since that first contract, right? There's some things that Laban has done that's not been good as far as toward his daughters and their security and so forth. And so maybe they're feeling this way in Genesis 31. Maybe they're feeling a way in Genesis 31 that they didn't feel prior to that. But I was just curious, trying to think about how, and we'll talk more about it too when we get to this next section where we'll talk about the secret. I'm curious to think about how this woman would be feeling. Maybe it was just a natural part of society to start with, as far as Laban making this deal with Jacob that involved his daughter. Maybe she was consulted. I mean, that's a possibility. But ultimately, because of how Laban is and what he does, when it gets to chapter 31, they're not pleased with what he's done, how he's treated them. Thoughts or comments? So now in verse 21 through verse 35, we're going back to Genesis 29. Jacob, it's been how many years? 7 years? He's excited about what? Rachel. And I don't quite understand this either, but anyway, but that night, evidently, he's not able to see her enough to recognize that it's not Rachel, but he learns of deceit the next day. And how does Laban justify giving him Leah instead of Rachel? Custom. She's the oldest daughter. That's our custom. Of course, he's just been deceitful about all of that, and so the deal is another deal is made. Within a week, you can have Rachel also if you do what? If you work for me another 7 years. And so that's what we got up there. And we have this question here: does Jacob love Leah, or is she unloved? How would we harmonize? What does verse 30 say? Jacob loves Rachel more than Leah. And then what we read in verse 31 and 33, verse 31 and 33, it uses this term that Leah is unloved. How do we harmonize that?
Not being loved is still less than being loved. I mean, it still works.
Maybe being loved less.
That's how I would understand it. That the emphasis is still on the comparison between Rachel and Leah, and and even when it says that Leah was unloved, it's not saying that she was not loved at all. That's how I would understand it, but it's not the love that Jacob had, that Jacob has for Rachel. So she is unloved in that sense.
She can tell the difference.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that we'll be talking about. I mean, if anybody have any more thoughts on that, as far as go ahead.
Talking, I mean, maybe Laban thought that he was going to finally have a husband 7 years, and then he wasn't deceitful when he told Jacob that he would give him Rachel, but then he realized that he hadn't found her somebody, and I mean, I don't know. It doesn't say any of that, so maybe Laban wasn't quite the scoundrel that we make him out to be.
What was the conversation like between Laban and Leah?
Yeah,
Like,
get in there.
yeah, put this veil on. Don't say a
You're
lot.
getting married.
And that must have been a rough week.
I'm still, y'all are going ahead, and I'm still thinking about Mark's comment for a second. Because I don't know, when I read that, it seems to me, like in 29, verse 19 and 20, that the understanding, or that Laban is implying that, yes, I agree to that term, you can have Rachel for 7 years, it's better to give her to you than somebody else. And so, anyway, I understand the possibility you're talking about, but it seems to me that there is deceit going on there. Anybody have any other thoughts on that?
It's definitely not clearly spelled out either.
Yeah, but if I'm Laban, if I'm Jacob, if I'm Laban, I mean, I should say, yes, but we got my older daughter first, and okay, but I see your point. So I think y'all were kind of getting into these next few questions. If you were Leah, how would you be feeling about Jacob? How would you be feeling about Rachel? But anyway, now let's start off that thought of was there a conversation there between Leah and Laban, for one thing? But I would assume that Leah knows everything that's gone on, right? She knows that she's not the first choice. I think she would know that. I mean, it seems clear that Jacob has made his love for Rachel seen, or it's evident. So if we think about Leah, how would she be feeling about Jacob? Would it just be that she's happy that she's getting married and that she's going to have this husband, even though she wasn't the first choice? Did we learn that when she starts having children, did we learn that she wanted this husband to love her? That you look at down in verse 32, verse 34, now that, I think that tells us a little bit about her thinking, is that she wasn't against this deal that was made, even if she hadn't been asked. I don't know if she was asked or not. If she was, anyway, she wasn't against it. In fact, or maybe it's just this thought that this is my situation and I'm going to make the best of it, and I want this good relationship. Yeah. How would she be feeling? How would you, if you're Leah, how do you think you'd be feeling about Rachel? Yeah. But here right at the beginning, my husband has served Laban for 7 years for Rachel, and he gets me instead. But then he agrees to serve another 7 years to have Rachel. So now now I've got to share my husband with with Rachel. And we do see when they start having children, we do see some problems there, right? We do see some jealousy and some bitterness and so forth in the relationship, and so if I was Leah, I think I would be thinking, I don't, I'm the older sister. I was given to him first, and I don't want to share. That's how I'd be thinking. But at the same time, here she is, and her father has made this arrangement with Jacob, and so is it just a matter of me, Leah, thinking that, well, I just got to accept this and make the best of it?
Good for us, just so much we don't know.
Yeah, and
Possibilities could be endless.
yeah.
Maybe they hate each other.
And I realize some of the questions we asked, we're going to answer them in the Western speculation. It's interesting to ask them. It's interesting to think about how somebody was feeling and to look at the possibilities. Some of this we can't draw an absolute conclusion on. But for example, this last question here, as far as not the last one we're going to ask, but do these verses tell us anything about Leah's character? And it may depend on how we think she was feeling and why she was feeling that way. Has the first bell rung yet? Okay. And so, right now at this point in time, would we think of Leah as a woman of virtue or a woman of vice? Or both, in some ways? What do you think? I tend to think of virtue because of some of the reasons we just gave, as far as what she's evidently agreed to or is willing to do. Kathy? Yeah. I think, we can see that jealousy come in when the kids come in. We were just discussing the possibility of maybe jealousy being there prior. And again, we're just throwing out possibilities. Maybe these sisters were happy to share a husband with each other. That's a possibility, right? So I certainly wouldn't state what the text actually shows it when jealousy came in. But what we just went through is just an effort for us to put ourselves in their place and try to understand what we might be feeling at that point in time. Laura?
She accused her of taking her husband.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yeah, that's what I wrote down. Would you be happy to share your husband? Whose husband was he first? And I gave that same reference you just gave, chapter 30, verse 15. But did she think this right off the bat? Was she thinking that, or once they start having this problem because of the children and this quarrel between the two of them, or this issue between the two of them, is she now bringing that up in her mind and saying, well, you know, he was mine first anyway, and you taking him away. In fact, did, as we keep reading, did Leah have to have permission from Rachel to be with Jacob? I'm not asking you if the law says, but look at chapter 30. Look at chapter 30, verse 15. I'll go 14, 15, and so forth. But in verse 15, she said to her, "It is a small matter for you to take my husband. Would you take my son's mandrakes?" So Rachel said, "Therefore he may lie with you tonight in return for your son's mandrakes." Why did she have to give Leah permission? I mean, it seemed like she. Yeah. Okay. Has the second bell rang yet? Okay. I don't always hear it. Okay, so I guess maybe a bottom line is that last question that we were kind of wanting to get at is, heard that one. Whether we thought of Leah as a woman of vice or virtue, at least at this point in time. All right, we will go on from there, and we'll be discussing. Hopefully, I'd like to plan on finishing this. I'll send another email out here directly, but I'd like to try to finish this Sunday. All right, thank you for your comments.